group NDAs, and it turned out that we didn't have to do as many as we had thought.
So by getting an NDA with Google, by some amazing coincidence, it turned out that they had somebody in almost all the important open source projects that we needed.
So that we actually did it. We managed to get everybody disclosed within about a week, which we have deemed in retrospect as simultaneous.
Well, we didn't get everybody. But we intentionally wanted to err on the side of leaving deserving parties out, even though, just to err on that side and not risk a leak as much as we actually needed anybody.
One of the interesting things that happened was we managed to demonstrate this bug to Ben across the internet, and I think this was the first time that any code other than your laptop had run this, had been involved in this thing, or at least outside of your
close control.
The
first time this attack transited the internet, to my knowledge.
Yeah. So.
IBM absolutely refused to sign an NDA with us.
Yeah, period. They didn't find out until the ICASI meeting.
Microsoft was enthusiastic about talking with us. They got the info maybe a weekend earlier than everybody else.
So at any rate, we were pointed to this group called ICASI, which I'd never heard of, by several different groups, and eventually wound up disclosing to Steve Manswick of Juniper, who was sort of ICASI's project manager on this thing. And we pulled in, all these companies turned out to be relevant, and we really didn't even expect that necessarily going in. But even like a company like Nokia, for reasons we'll get to in a bit, turned out to be useful on this.
More useful than some. The Red Hat lawyers worked the weekend to tweak the NDA for us. Sun, we never got past the form of type your vulnerability here.
No, that's not quite true. We talked repeatedly to people at Sun who wouldn't let us past the please type your vuln here box.
Well, because you can email the guy that gets the form if you want.
Yeah, exactly.
Apple, we didn't absolutely know that they had their own TLS code, and we had heard that they weren't entirely friendly to vulnerability researchers.
So, and then, as Marsh said a minute ago, there were a lot of others, and frankly, we would have changed the list that we disclosed to if we had it to do over again, knowing what we knew. But we were trying, again, to limit scope. Oh, one thing real quick before we jump on here. This scope limiting thing turned out to matter. So someone reported via IRC the exact date and time of the meeting. Sorry, they're off by a day. Of the meeting at Google.
Yeah, so at this point, it was starting to leak out.
It already started to leak, exactly.
We managed a meeting on September 28th, or maybe it was the 29th. We got about 45 people there, about a dozen companies. We presented the technical details, showed packet captures, discussed the severity and impact, and we had Eric Rescorla, chair of the TLS working group, who, along with Nasko Oskov, and from Microsoft and Steve, kind of independently had the same idea, had identical proposals for a fix. And Rescorla was uniquely suited to write this up as an internet draft for proposing a formal solution.
Oh, yeah, one other thing that happened on the plane on the way out there, by the way, is that's the point where Marsh finally got around to getting client-initiated renegotiation working.
I told him it would work all along, but
yeah.
I only got a chance when we were on the plane. And it turns out this terrible case of client-initiated renegotiated. IIS is not susceptible to it, but just about every Apache and everything else that is a SSL server using OpenSSL is susceptible to the client-initiated renegotiation attack.
So just quickly on the proposed solution, and then we'll jump past this. But basically, the problem is that successive handshakes aren't cryptographically tied to one another. But SSL has this message called finished, which has a verified data that is explicitly designed to be an integrity check on a handshake. So the idea is basically send that verified data again on the next handshake to prove that you had the last handshake.
So the client and the server have to cooperate to do this. In order to, they have to cooperate to prove the non-existence of the man in the middle. But in order for this fix to work, both the client and the server absolutely have to be patched, and they have to negotiate the use of this TLS extension was the mechanism of implementation. We could not change anything about the cryptographic calculations in TLS because from what we learned, that would trigger a cryptographic review in a lot of important deployment scenarios that could literally take a year or more to effectively be deployed.
Okay, quickly, one of the other things that we learned that was interesting was how hard it is to build an ad hoc private team, cross-vendor team, to get work done. I'm sure there's a better way than what we wound up doing, but nobody that was involved seemed to know it. We wound up getting some help from OPSEC Trust to set up like a private wiki and do some vetting. We tried to find a way to set up a private mailing list. We wound up setting up a normal mailing list and then just telling everybody to be sure they used PGP, which, I mean, subject lines weren't encrypted, and remember that.
How many of you all have a PGP key ready to go right now?
I think this is the crowd where you should ask how many don't. I'm actually more curious about that. So there are a couple people that don't. But at any rate, what we did find is that while the security research community and the vendor contacts did universally have PGP, the product teams and the engineers that were actually going to have to implement solutions to this problem didn't. Almost universally did not have.
And sometimes we're completely forbidden from even using PGP in a work environment.
Turns out Silk is a pain to get going. We've been using it internally for several years now, but so I think we had about 5 people on a private Silk channel.
And we're opening this channel up just as soon as somebody can get us op again, and we can remove the key.
Last quick point, which we'll come back to again, I'm sure, is that after some really interesting initial discussion on this Mogul private mailing list, the vendors basically dried up, the commercial vendors, and we never did manage to get any useful data out of them.
We had some interesting technical conversations early on, but later in the process, the discussion turned more and more towards vendors wanting to argue the cat bag issue, and it became less constructive.
So we did get some quick initial implementations of safe renegotiation. So I only point this out to say that there was working code for this solution in October at worst, and I think some even in September. One of the other things we wanted to do is to disclose we were trying to disclose all interested parties, and so we wanted someone in the US government. So we went looking for a powerful, well-connected organization with wide-ranging reach, both domestically and abroad, and who would be very interested in a bug that had obvious intelligence implications. So we called the Internal Revenue Service, who put 3 accountants on an airplane that week to Kansas City, where Phone Factor is headquartered. And they were really nice to deal with.
I have to say,
true story.
During the entire process, the IRS was the most sincere and friendly group to work with.
All right. So remember that expiring NDA? It turns out that absolutely nobody was happy with it, as I said. That's life. Work was going really slowly after the initial burst of activity.
Well, we saw very little evidence of progress towards the technical solution from most vendors.
So we did find out quickly was that January 31st couldn't possibly work as a date. It's not a Patch Tuesday, so that's meaningful. Believe it or not, I didn't realize it was meaningful beyond Microsoft. What do I know? But it is.
Other vendors tie their stuff to that, and admins are expecting it and all that.
So it's not a weekday. It was a Sunday, I think. And like Marsh said, holy crap. Someone pointed out to us fairly quickly after we published this. Did you know that Black Hat starts on the day your NDA expired? Whoops. I'm seriously. So at any rate. So don't be like Dan. So by late October, I was on repeated phone calls with the vendors and with Steve Manswick from iCASI. Everybody was begging that we postpone publishing the research beyond that. And actually, what they're really asking for is, can you extend the NDA? Which, of course, we couldn't, right? I mean, it's a contract. We're done. We can't unilaterally extend it. And that was not an accident. So, like, the NDA that John signed expired, and we kind of had in the back of our head that John wouldn't feel bound to extend out of the goodness of his heart just because Microsoft didn't want to work it into their dev timeline.
We told the vendors maybe we could ask nicely, but that's about all we can do.
So our position never changed officially, but I have to say, behind the scenes, Marcia and I started arguing pretty heatedly about whether or not we would say wait till the next Patch Tuesday or whether it was just going to be January 31st. But the reality is we found out fairly quickly.
Is the audience getting a sense of just how tedious it is talking about NDAs by this point?
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm really sorry about that.
3 weeks or a month now.
Yeah. At any rate, but this is the reality of the situation. It wouldn't have mattered. So we were asked by one vendor to wait until May, and another vendor to wait until August, over a year after this thing was originally discovered.
And then we finally
never
started to
gonna
clue in that these people who were security incidents response coordinators from certain vendors were, I don't know.
They were there for one reason, to delay the process.
To delay
End
the
of story.
process, yep.
All right, well, the good news is we didn't have to work it out. So we had been watching the IETF channel bindings work on the TLS mailing list for a while, and without getting into the backstory on channel bindings,
Essentially,
the
this
reality
bug
is
a channel bindings bug,
Yeah.
except that their channel bindings work was vertically in the protocol stack, and this bug was horizontally on the connection across the renegotiation.
But at any rate, they were getting their breadcrumbs closer and closer together until one day we were all flaming each other wildly on the mailing list, arguing about the cat in the bag with no appreciable vendor progress, when the TLS mailing list turned into full disclosure for a day. And I don't think you probably can read that, but this is Martin Rex of SAP, and the subject line said, MITM attack on delayed TLS client auth through renegotiation.
He had worked
all
it
in the
out.
subject line.
Yes. All the details were there, the essential details. He had worked it out and decided the best thing to do would be to drop it as a 0 day on the public mailing list.
So I called Martin, and I said, hey, you know, guess what? There's a project going on. We've known about this for months. Please, could you keep it quiet for a second while we figure out how to react to what you just did? Because it wasn't immediately obvious to anybody other than, I think, Marsh. So at any rate, we had a call with the Project Mogul team, mostly with the vendors, frankly, the commercial vendors, who all unanimously decided that they hoped it went away. And they gave us the very clear message that it would be extremely irresponsible of us to publish the entirety of the research, because after all, nobody's going to notice. It was just a techie mailing list, right? So, did anyone notice? So HG has a couple followers on Twitter, I think.
Yeah, let's see.
A couple thousand.
A few people clicked on it.
Yeah.
It got retweeted. All this was on a conference call.
During
where
the call, we're
Steve
sitting
and I
there.
are taking constant static from, the VPs of several very large companies about how this is just not happening.
Yeah, this is going to get swept under the rug. So I got bored with the whole thing.
Yeah, Steve didn't have anything else going on in his private life, and decided to, take a week off to have an addition to the family. Let's hear it. Phoebe, everyone. So, anyone want to guess how long it took for working exploit code to be posted to full disclosure? And it wasn't mine.
2 days.
2 days? I had guessed, this is a pretty complicated thing to exploit. I mean, it took me like 3 weeks of late nights. And so I felt kind of dumb. It's 18 hours and 34 minutes. And this is an attachment. SSL.c is a working exploit. Initial reactions. I came to work the next day, starting to get phone calls from media.
Well, hold on a second. The night before, so while I'm sitting there on the phone with Ikazi getting squawked at about this.
I let Steve do the conference calls,
Yeah.
and he didn't entirely know what I was doing. But I took, all of our research. I had a few hours to kind of polish up the paper we had written and update it, and posted it all on my blog. So we went full disclosure with everything we had. I did not want the world to go through a period of confusion and misinformation or partial information when I was sitting on all the data and the basics of the exploit were out, including working exploit code. So the next day we had a couple of initial reactions. Moxie Marlinspike had a very helpful quote, "The sky is not falling," and it's not a reason to panic. And another common interpretation of the attack was it's just like CSRF attacks in that the attacker gets to specify the URL, say, or the request. And that analogy doesn't hold perfectly, but there was a lot of initial hope that the mitigations that had been put into place over the years against CSRF attacks would also help with this. That turned out not to be so much the case. We hadn't done this. We were definitely trying to underplay the severity of the bug so that we were not guilty of overplaying the severity of the bug. That was probably not the most accurate characterization of the system.